So I don't know, good morning or good afternoon? I think it's good morning for you and good afternoon for me. Okay, awesome. So how are you, Fatu?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I had a very restful weekend. How are you?
Same. It's even if we are still hustling on Sunday.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
But I had a restful weekend as well. And it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for
So the idea basically is to introduce you to the community in
mhm.
regard to the e-learning class that we are launching together at the end of March. And we talk in her community, we talk a lot about heritage, we talk a lot about culture. And I wanted somebody as well like you to explore that conversation from a personal point of view, professional point of view, and maybe more point of view. So maybe first of all, to help the community get to know you, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your journey, maybe where you were born, how you came into being passionate by creative industry. Why do heritage matter to you? Take it in the order you want, but the idea is just to introduce yourself.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the live. My name is Fatou Ndiaye. Um, I am from Senegal, Dakar, Senegal. I was born in Dakar from a Senegalese father and a mother from Niger. However, I grew up mostly between Montreal and New York, and I think that my upbringing makes me consider myself as a third culture person, and that really infuses my work and my approach to culture and heritage. I think that my first introduction to culture and heritage was really when I was younger, going back home, back to the continent every summer to visit family members or to visit my father, who was living there at the time. We had the opportunity to explore different artisanal markets, museums, zoos. Um, and it really, I think, was the first time that I discovered my passion, which is African culture, African heritage. And I think what is what really stuck to me in regards to my educational background was the transmission of those knowledge systems and those practices. So that led me to completing my BA, my bachelor's in international development studies and African studies from McGill University, where I had the chance to learn a bit more about the social, economical, and political dynamics um, that affect the development of the continent and that impact the development of the continent. Um, and so within that time, I was very much interested on gender dynamics. So I concentrated my studies on my research on gender dynamics across the continent and across social systems mainly, and how that interacts with the political and the economical. Shortly after my when I graduated my BA, I still was very much had that culture bug in me, and that mainly is because I also give that credit to the fact that I was VP events at MAS, which is the McGill African Student Society. So I had the chance to organize cultural and educational events for the African Society of the McGill. So students would come to our events, and we would have the opportunity to gather, have dialogue, learn more, and exchange more about our cultures because it was a very much international um, scene. So we were African children, African people from all over the continent. So that really, really inspired me to continue on this journey towards culture. So I decided to pursue my master's in international arts management from HEC. And that really gave us an international perspective as to how cultural organizations are managed. And I think that so far, this dual background allows me to serve as a cultural manager and as a creative strategist for international NGOs. Currently, I collaborate with Montreal based institutions on initiatives that service the diasporic and creative communities here. So, in a nutshell, that's my introduction.
this is amazing. This is great that you had that all that expand of experiences and from an educational standpoint, but also from a practical and experience standpoint. Um, how did you came to be passionate about creative industries in general? What makes you really into the creative industry? Um, why did you choose it as a path?
Yes, absolutely. I think it was shortly after my bachelor's, I went to Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan, where my father was living and where a lot of my family members are today as well. And I had the opportunity to have an internship at the United Nations Industrial Organization. So they are the branch of the United Nations that focus on industrial and environmental development. And within that time, under my supervisor at the time, Tijan Boy, I had the chance to discover the creative and cultural industries. I was looking for it was time for me to explore and research my path in terms of what I wanted to do next in my career. And when I discovered the culture and creative industry, seeing that it could be an engine for socioeconomic development, especially for women and youth agents, that's when I totally decided to commit myself to this path. And of course, discovering that fashion and textile was considered a CCI very much motivated me as well. So at the time, UNIDO was working on a textile factory in the northern region of the country, in the Boaké region, where they were planning on opening this factory to valorize the traditional textiles. And so I had the chance to work on a TDR for this specific project in order to find ways to include more women textile weavers within the practice because as we know it's a practice that is mainly dominated by men. It's
Mhm.
transmitted from father to son. So the idea was to find ways to how can we include women so that they can also be empowered, so economically and socially through this textile factory. So once I was working from that project, I also discovered the work of the African Development Bank and the Fashionomics Africa Initiative, the work that they were doing there in terms of capacity building, access to market, etc. And I thought that that was really where I wanted to focus myself in terms of the next part of my career, and that's when I decided to then pursue my master's in international arts management. I didn't go for the fashion route. I wanted a general route that allowed me to really see how we can, and the topic of discussion today, heritage as strategy, how is fashion can be considered as culture, and
Yeah.
how can we valorize craftsmanship and artisanal work through the medium of fashion. So that was really my focus, and I think that in a nutshell, it began with research. It really began with research. It didn't begin in a studio. It didn't begin in any other context than me and my computer and at different articles, reading different articles, and learning more about the subject and coming up with my own theories as to how to um, contribute to the development of the CCIs. And during my master's, I would say that I had a chance to analyze different themes, and one of those themes was the transition between intangible heritage to tangible culture, which we will also discuss during our
Yeah.
masterclass on. And I think that this spotlighted the need to valorize the work between artisans, which led me then to designing. So starting to design, having that conversation with artisans in regards to how can we preserve their know-how in the contemporary. So really infusing their traditional techniques with contemporary aesthetics is what my idea was at first. So I started with artisans in Niger. I'm from Niger, so I, would work with Tuareg silversmiths, weavers, tailors as well there around traditional materials such as the melfa and the kunta textile in order to see how we could create new designs that would bring attention to their expertise and to their craftsmanship. And I think that this really led me then um, to a bigger, I would say, more active collaboration with a bigger community of creatives. And it really motivated me to have a conversation with diasporic creatives as well, who can sometimes be, you know, geographically um, distanced from these artisanal communities, my goal was to then bridge the gap and bring them together and allow them to have a conversation together around these materials so that we can find the opportunities, the challenges as a collective around different practices and mediums that would facilitate um, our, our the use of tradition in the contemporary. So that really led me to um, launch FAD, which is a strategic creative agency where I explored the intersection between fashion, art, and development. And actively, the mission is to continue to bridge the gap between African artisans and not only diasporic communities, but also creative communities on a global scale. And um, particularly through research, design, and storytelling, which are our three pillars, which is something that we will also discuss during the masterclass.
Amazing. I think for some people, it's not always easy to realize how do you articulate culture with
Mhm,
as a strategy
mhm,
for a business. Can
yes.
can you describe a little bit what it looks like? Let's say, how do you start? Do you start by documenting yourself, archiving information, or do you start with a community and then working with that community, you trying to
Mhm,
structure it into something more um, operationable in a way? Because there's a lot of tradition and techniques and know-how which are really like in small communities, in small territories on the African continent, and it's not always easy to
mhm.
create a business operation structure around it. So, in your opinion, maybe for some of the example that you have seen in real life, how do you transfer that knowledge into something operationable, something strategic for your brand? How do you transfer um, that patrimonial asset into maybe a creative signature in a brand? Do you have maybe a few example that can help also our audience maybe have a greater understanding of maybe the process
Mhm.
or the materialization or a tangible or intangible heritage that we have on the continent, for instance?
Absolutely. I think that the philosophy of heritage as strategy is is an important one, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion because heritage it offers an inherent value, which is around sustainability, around circularity, around ethical sourcing, which I believe that are solutions that global markets are in the need for right now. So I think when it comes to the approach, um, I started with research. I think that research is the first step towards understanding how to leverage heritage w- in regards to the surroundings that we're in, understanding the skills that we find in our environments, the materials that we find in our environments, the approaches as well. So really being able to see what is the unique value of of our heritage or our, collective or individual heritage in certain cases. So that leads you probably certain people to interacting with artisans and artisan communities in a way that is not for extraction, but in a way that is for um, really propulsing their work forward and understanding how to exchange in a way that is valuable and equitable towards valorizing their skills. So, for example, if you're working with a textile weaver, it'll be important to understand what the weaving techniques entail, where it started, what the particular designs, what they mean, the symbols as well, how to best translate them into design, which I believe is the next step. And I think that design, it's really applying, those frameworks that translate this intangible heritage into tangible products. And I think that this is where we conversate the most with the community. So this is where I think that it's a good idea to approach other designers, others creatives in order to best um, come together and understand what the challenges are to transform certain traditional materials which are not always, transformed or scaled. So it's important to have several different expertises in order to do so in a way that um, the product is able to translate in a way that where the quality serves a global market. And I would say that once that product is tangible, then we enter the storytelling phase. And this is really around developing narratives that communicate the cultural value to global audiences, whether it's diasporic or just creative audiences, and really building that trust. I believe that this process is very important to follow because, in regards to heritage, it's really important to foster um, authenticity in order to have that longevity. We want African heritage, African craftsmanship to be positioned as timeless. And so I think that it's very important to follow these steps, these concrete steps, which might not be the fastest process, but they counter the very fast trend cycle that we see today, that is disrupting the planet in many ways, and that is positioning African heritage, African fashion, in this case, as you know, a benchmark, because our competitive advantage is that we are sustainable and we are slow within our techniques. And so I think that it's important for people or entrepreneurs, designers who are seeking to leverage heritage to really, respect the slowness and the values of heritage in that way.
I think that there are two very important topic that you raised, that you brought to the table. Is really the notion of extraction, to say like we are taking out and we're not necessarily giving back,
Yeah,
and also that notion of time, like because let's say for the last decade, what I've seen a lot is that when we're talking about African things, I'm putting it into brackets because it doesn't mean anything to just place the African thing on a place the African label on a technique or whatever. We usually don't have that approach to territory, to communities, to people, and I really hope like the approach we want to bring to the conversation is like we need more precision when we're talking about heritage. We need more precision about the people, the process, and respect the process because the value comes from the process. And
absolutely.
I'm very happy that you're highlighting that because it's key to say if we're talking about Kente tomorrow, it's not digital printing that we're talking about. It's a process of using thread, creating some motif. It's also a matter of the pattern that you create, the color palette that you use has a cultural significance, and that
Exactly.
cultural significance has to be highlighted as well and has to be, in a way, protected. So I think what you're tapping into here in terms of respecting the process, accepting the slowness of the process, and not being into the process of extracting only might be the kind of conversation that can really start, also direct the creative and the consumers into taking the time to understand it's not only an aesthetic thing, it's beyond that.
Exactly.
And it's a matter of community beyond the aesthetic. And it's also a matter of understanding the culture of people, the values, and because those values give insight into the kind of people they are and their culture.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
it's very important that you're highlighting that. And part of the class as well is going to be in that direction to say that there's a lot of designers who are using several techniques, but they never name the techniques. They just show the final product and they don't name the process. They don't name the territories.
Hmm.
And I feel like as we are living in an era of everything is digital, everything is online, it's
Hmm.
so easy just to copy paste an idea because it looks beautiful without crediting the people who are, behind it, or without crediting the people who are the source of that aesthetic or the source of that technique. So
Exactly.
I think there's also it's not necessarily our role as part of the work we're going to be doing in the class that we're launching, but I think there's also a, a, a bigger question around how do we protect? Because it's not because it's like small communities in villages somewhere that there's no IP, but how do we protect that IP, and how do we make sure that the value that is being created on top of that technique, or that special know-how, or that special craftsmanship, come back and serve that specific community as well. So
Okay.
those are very interesting topics, and I guess part of the time that we will have in the program, we might explore part of it, um, and also advise the designer and the creative to go a layer deeper when they're exploring a technique, or when they're exploring a craft with a certain community, to really value the community as well.
Mhm,
Because unfortunately, the what is common and what is seems to be usual is that we just say, "Oh, it's African inspired." But what
mhm,
does that even mean, African inspired, if you're not saying it's coming, let's say this specific cotton is coming from Korogo, from Cote d'Ivoire, or this specific weaving is coming from Bogotanga in Ghana, and only people in Bogotanga in Ghana do it this way. Are we really creating brands beyond our aesthetic, beyond trends? And I think that's one element that we will really highlight and really be precise about, because pinpointing those territory, that's what brings also the value to the label. And there's a lot of international example that could be named. If I'm talking about champagne, from champagne, you can't say champagne if it's not from there, so it should be the same. Like, you can't say DOP if it's not from Cameroon and it went through a specific process. You can't say Bogolan if it was not made a certain way in Mali. You can't say Faso Fani if it was not made in Burkina Faso through a certain process. So I think the larger picture is that to really use culture and as a strategy, and use heritage as a strategy, is to go that deep and to be more precise about how do we name things, how do we protect things, and how do we value the people behind it, and how do we create a supply chain that allows those communities to maintain the very specific knowledge that they have, and to preserve it, and not only to see the museum as we as we see for a
yes,
lot of. I mean, like, when I look at kentes, for instance, the most beautiful kentes today are in museum, because nobody weaves the kente anymore like they used to
mhm,
centuries ago, because people say it's too expensive, because nobody really, I don't know a company that is specific and very took the game to the bigger level, like the international level, to say we are a Kente manufacturer, and everybody in the world know us because we are the best Kente manufacturer in the world. So those are the kind of brand that we're talking about. Like, how do you take those knowledge, those techniques, those specific crafts, and elevate them to a level that the recognition is there. It's not like when you see a printed version of it, you misgot you misled, you know?
mhm,
Because when you're drinking prosecco, you know that you're not drinking champagne.
mhm,
You know
mhm,
that you're drinking prosecco, and it
mhm,
should be the same. Like, if you're buying a piece of fabric made in China, imitating the aesthetic of a technique from Africa, you know that you don't have the real thing in a way. So
absolutely.
just to jump on that, and maybe, do you have some example of project you worked on? Because I know that there's also a challenge when you're a creative person and you're working with artisans.
Mhm,
You might not be working on the same level of understanding most of the time,
mhm,
because sometimes artisans in certain community, they don't speak French, they don't speak English. So you also have to take into account the cultural element of the social economic dynamics
yes,
into the process of working with them and
mhm.
collaborating with them. Do you have some example of project you've been on? And maybe how did you articulate that challenge of, operating in small communities who do not necessarily live in a digital world?
I think that when it comes to the biggest challenge of working with artisans, it can be communication, whether it's language barriers, whether it's technological communications, that are created by distance. And I think that although this is a challenge, it does allow us to find concrete solutions in order to better facilitate that exchange. I am one of examples that come to mind is, when I started collaborating with artisans from Niger, from the Boubou Ama Museum, my first field trip there was really going to have a better understanding as to what their spaces look like, how they work, what they sell. And from there, I was able to establish connections with a few artisans. One of them is, his name is Moumin. He's a Tuareg silversmith. And so we started exchanging by drawing, for example, the designs. And my specific approach was taking inspiration from traditional designs and infusing them with contemporary aesthetics. So it really maintains the skill or the technique of the artisan, but just invites them to push it a bit further. So I think that that was our first design, for example, was a pair of earrings that was inspired by these traditional Tuareg earrings that are mainly worn in weddings. And the idea that we had was to supersize it. Let's make it bigger so that we can really showcase the traditional graphic designs that are done on it, the quality of the silver, just the quality of the confection of the design was the idea of supersizing that design. So, for example, it's really starting with those small steps that allow them to challenge themselves and push themselves a bit further in regards to making designs that they were not necessarily as to make in the past, as previously it's passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, and the same designs are recreated continuously, which I believe is extremely rich. However, it's always good to intervene in certain cases and design things that can also speak to global markets so that they can continue to preserve their know-how. Because I think that when it comes to valorizing the craftsmanship of artisans, it's extremely important in order to ensure that they can continue to practice it generation after generation after generation. Um, and another project that also comes to mind was the design of the Safa choker, which is a necklace that we designed. However, this time I was not physically in Niger or Niamey. I was in Canada. So I had that challenge. How are we going to communicate this design so that it translates well? So we started with a 2D model of the the choker, which then was translated into a 3D model, which allowed him to have a file to really understand what the mandate was, what the mission was with this choker. And once that was complete, we then took the final design and then we retranslated it into a complete 3D model, which then now serves as a benchmark for future designs if we were to recreate this choker for another person, let's say. This was done in collaboration with a another um, collective that works around artisans called Indigenous. So once again, it's really important to engage with our community, with other creatives, in order to find examples to counter this challenge. I'm also thinking about a more wider case study, which is the 2020 cruise collection by Dior, which invited the legendary Pathé to provide um, his expertise on how to best leverage African craftsmanship. And I feel like in terms of the infrastructure, this was a very concrete example because Dior engaged with actual supply chains as they work with Uniwax in Cote d'Ivoire and also the Sumano Association in Morocco for artisanal scenography as the show took place in Marrakesh. So I think that it's really important to engage in cross-sector collaborations when it comes to uh, engaging with artisans and collaborating with them because it allows us to facilitate those solutions in a more concrete way. And I think that it's these explorations, this research that allowed us to then present a full collection at the Avant-Garde Fashion Showcase last May around this craftsmanship that featured the Kunta textile and Tuareg jewelry and as well the Melfa, which were our first case studies, let's say, of materials that we wanted to understand how to best transform them. So I think in terms of communicating with the artisans, it's very important to find solutions that work for that specific region. For example, I worked on an exhibition in September for a brand called Batik Boutique, which they work with batik textiles in Ghana. They also invited another designer called Tamala, who works with artisans in Madagascar. And her solution, Tamala's solution, was to hire a local coordinator, even if she couldn't be on ground at all times. There was a local coordinator that was translating the vision to the artisan. So that allows for respect and to be maintained, for cultural context to be also respected in that way, and just to ensure that the products that are created once again translate the quality that they need to serve on the market. So I think that there are different solutions that apply to different regions.
Thank you so much for giving those example because it shows that it is possible to structure a supply chain around artisans. It is possible to be also in a relationship that is balanced in terms of every part
Yeah.
in a collaboration brings their own expertise,
Hmm.
and I really believe in those collaboration frameworks. There's a lot of knowledge sharing in terms of
Yes.
way of doing in terms of savoir-faire, but
Totally.
not also savoir-faire, but also like savoir-être. And
Hmm.
I think it's also that's why I really believe for the creative space at the African level, we should really build those bridges to make it possible for artisans to also be included in the economy in a very prolific way. As they're building their communities, they're also sustaining and helping build a brand. And
Hmm.
balancing that exchange, it's also something that that is really empowering for those communities and make that can allow us to preserve techniques and to preserve something that becomes a singular signature of a community or of a territory as well.
Hmm.
So, can you give us just maybe just an idea of um, I don't want to say necessarily like the structure of learning that you're going to be teaching in your master class, but maybe the aspect of technical and maybe practical things that people will be able to take away from your class.
There, the idea of the class is really for participants to understand how to translate intangible heritage into tangible culture. So it will be very important to first define what is heritage. How does, for example, on an institutional level, um, how does it define itself? What are examples of intangible heritage? What are the challenges around preserving tangible heritage? And what are the concrete solutions and opportunities that we can um, implement in order to ensure that our artisans are preserving their know-how generation after generation? And once defined, we will then enter in the process as to how to translate this into a tangible product, which once again goes through the three pillars of research, design, and storytelling. So we'll really go in depth with strategic um, approaches in order to ensure that we are creating a product that will hold value on the market, not just in one trend cycle, but on a time in a timeless way. And we will also exchange one another in the masterclass. We'll be able to engage in dialogue because it's very important to learn. We all have background, so it's very important in order to understand heritage, to understand each. And we will then end with case studies, concrete case studies that participants will be able to take um, different aspects from and apply it to their own work, and will then lead with the conclusions of the entire class. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think that it's a very important conversation. Heritage as strategy, in fact, is, I think, the future of the creative space, not only the African creative space. And yeah, I think that participants will be able to learn a lot from the course. So I look forward to exchanging with all of them.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Fatu, for your time and also interaction with us and the Mulu community.
Thank you so
Um, so just to give a little bit of a broader precision about the program. So the program is about building an African heritage brand. And the idea is that in the first part of the program, the fundamentals of a brand. And as a complementary of building those foundation for a brand, there will be a big topic about your masterclass about how do you assess cultural assets? How do you transfer it into tangible products? And how do you tell a consistent story behind it so that it becomes also a signature of your house? And the vision is really to anchor a little bit more brands into the African territory and not to have also brands who are coming into competition with lookalike things because there's a lot of lookalike things out there and they
Mhm,
just, paste the African um, title in front of it and it should be making sense. And, and, and and I think what I've seen this last decade in the creative space, especially the diasporic continental African continent creative space is that the few brands who are succeeding at creating consumer goods and who are still here after a decade of trying are the few ones who have really created that bridge between small communities, specific techniques, exclusive craftsmanship, and the market. And I think uh, teaching it is important because it doesn't come naturally to to a lot of entrepreneurs. And even if we look at heritage, global heritage brands, it doesn't also happen just overnight. And I think one part of your the highlight that you gave today is really about it's not about extraction. It's really about creating a conversation with those communities. And it's not only about um it's way beyond we're doing it for money. We're really doing it also for the sake of the preservation of an identity of communities and people's stories. And I think that the world that we're living in today, where everything is digitalized, everybody is talking about AI,
mhm,
you can just use generative AI to create something that looks like something but isn't something. So I think it's more and more important. And I think the value of those deep rooted, anchored brands is going to be more, even more and more valuable in the future. And I love that you take some example of also global heritage brands who know how to tap into those assets, those cultural assets to revisit their creative process. Like you took the example of Dior. I can take also the example of Chanel a few years ago. Um, there's some other ones who do it very poorly, like Valentino. I think, but that was 10 years ago. So I think maybe now the culture has evolved and maybe
yes,
also the approach has evolved. And we have seen all the scandal about cultural appropriation and where cultural appreciation ends and cultural
mhm,
appropriation starts. So I think the vision is really to be able to understand how do you structure that strategy, because when we say strategic, it's not only like you use the name, you tell the storytelling, you have to be doing the work.
mhm,
And so yeah, I think it's
mhm,
very important to highlight that, and I really like that you pinpointed all those aspects of why heritage can be a strategy and how to build a framework to transform transform heritage into not only tangible products but also stories that
yes,
carries the DNA of a brand.
mhm,
So let me just look at a different live spot if we have people in the room who have questions. If they have question about the program or question for
yeah,
you, um, just say, let's see here. I don't see question. Let me check in the live here on Riverside if we have any questions. Okay. So we don't have any specific questions. So we'll if you guys in the live you have any question, I think Fatu will be happy to answer, or me, I will be happy to answer as well. And
Mhm.
if there's no question, I think we have all the information online regarding the program. You
Exactly.
can find all the information on Moonlook website. I'm going to be sharing also. Let me see if I can do that. I can be sharing here a link about. There's a link here that's showing on the screen. I think you can only click the link if you're in a Riverside Live, but I'm
Mhm.
going to be sharing as well in her stories. You can have access to the link to know more about the class online. Enrollment is open. So, enrollment is open until February, at the end of February. Today is February 1st. Happy
Mhm.
New Month to everyone, by
Happy
the
New
way.
Month. Yes, happy Black History Month as well.
Yeah, the History Month as well. So the enrollment is open until the end of the month of February, and we will be starting the classes by month of March. The idea is to have a 2 month intense program with experts like Fatu, but also 7 other experts talking about different topics, but still in relation to how do you build a framework to transform heritage into a consistent, prolific, and wealth making project or brand, if it's that's what you want to do. And we're welcoming in a program um, created from different background and different also sectors. So it's not supposed to be only fashion, it could be design, it could be beauty or lifestyle, or it could just be like curiosity to know more about how do you build a brand with African heritage in the 21st century. So thank you so much, Fatu, for making the time today. I'm
Thank you for
looking
having me.
forward to share. I think we will be sharing also highlight of our conversation on her social media in the upcoming weeks, so people can get to know you also better. It's my pleasure. It was my pleasure to come across your profile and get to know a little bit more about your vision that really is very close to mine as well
Mhm.
regarding how do we really make a difference in a creative space, why also having an impact at a social level, because that's what's really drive me, and I think that's why it's important to really look at heritage, and not only not from only from the extraction perspective, but only from also from a perspective of empowering and strengthening communities, and sustaining techniques, and preserving craft and preserving identity. Because at the end of the day, the idea is also to exist in a very capitalistic and consumeristic
Mm.
world with something that has a deeper layer of value than just buying something and trashing it the day after. So thank you so much for making the time today. If you have any comment for the end of our session, just share, please.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me a part of the Moonlook Academy. I'm very thrilled to be a part of this community of experts, and I'm looking forward to the masterclass at the end of March. I think it's going to be a very insightful one. We're going to be talking about context. We're going to be talking about strategy, approach in order to translate heritage into strategy. And so I think that it'll be very valuable for anyone who is operating in the African creative space. So we invite you all to sign up to enroll for the course.
Awesome. Thank you. So if there's no question in the chat, thank you everyone who attended today. Thank you for everyone who joined us. And let's be in touch. Let's keep the conversation going until the beginning of the class. And for those who are going to be joining the class, we're looking forward to have you. And we're looking forward to build this community of people who go, a layer deeper. Thank you so much.